I never imagined that a bite, just that, a bite, could reveal so much about a worldwide idol. But at Neverland in 1993, while I was taking care of the dog that lived near the main house, Bubbles attacked me without warning. I screamed. The staff came running. And before I could understand what was happening, Michael Jackson appeared desperate, gasping, trembling, as if he had just lost something precious. He held my injured arm and apologized, crying, saying it was his fault. I had never seen an adult react like that, much less someone the whole world called a king, and to this day I wonder what really made that man break down like that. If it were you, would you have believed that reaction? I was 21 years old, with no experience beyond a municipal animal shelter, when I received the call, "You've been approved for Neverland." The silence on the line said more than the words. This was too big for me, too surreal, too impossible. I stood there holding the phone long after the caller had hung up, staring at nothing, trying to process what had just happened. Neverland Ranch, Michael Jackson's private world, the place that existed somewhere between reality and myth. And somehow, I had been chosen to work there. When I arrived at the property 3 days later, the first thing that hit me was the smell. Eucalyptus mixed with wet earth, fresh grass, and something floral I couldn't identify. Everything looked too beautiful to be real, like someone had designed paradise and forgotten to tell the rest of the world about it. Gardens stretched in every direction, pathways lined with roses, and in the distance I could hear carousel music playing softly. The staff moved with practiced efficiency, acting as if nothing about this place was extraordinary, but everyone knew it was. You could see it in the careful way they spoke, in the reverent tone they used when mentioning Michael, in the way they walked through Wonderland, pretending it was just another workplace. I was taken to a small room near the administrative building. It was plain, almost sterile compared to the fantasy outside. A woman in her 50s sat behind a desk and slid a thick document toward me without smiling. "Confidentiality agreement," she said. "Read carefully. Sign at the bottom." I picked it up with trembling hands. The weight of it felt symbolic, heavier than paper should feel. Page after page outlined what I could and couldn't discuss, who I could and couldn't talk to, the consequences of breaking these rules. The legal language was intimidating, designed to make you understand that this wasn't a game. I hesitated, pen hovering over the signature line. Was I ready for this? Ready to enter a world where silence was mandatory and every moment had to be guarded? But I signed, because the opportunity was too incredible to refuse. After the paperwork, I met my supervisor, a man named Robert who'd worked with exotic animals for decades. He walked me through the property, past aviaries with tropical birds, past enclosures where llamas watched us with curious eyes, past the amusement park rides, sitting silent in the sun. Then he stopped and looked at me with complete seriousness. "There's only one mistake you absolutely cannot make," he said quietly. "Don't scare Bubbles. He's a chimpanzee. He doesn't forget, and he doesn't forgive." The way he said it made my stomach tighten. This wasn't casual advice. This was a survival rule. "The dog you'll be caring for is gentle," Robert continued, "but very protective of his space. He needs routine, consistency. Animals here need predictability." I nodded, trying to memorize every word. Then he added something that made the hair on my arms stand up. "If Michael appears, when he appears, stay calm. He hates seeing people with fear. It reminds him of things he'd rather forget." I wanted to ask what he meant, but his expression told me not to push. As we walked deeper into the property, Robert's voice softened slightly. "Everyone who works here protects Michael, not just his physical safety. Anyone can do that. We protect what's inside him, the parts that got damaged a long time ago." I didn't understand then. How could I? I was 21, from a normal family, working my first real job. I'd never experienced fame or the crushing weight of being watched constantly. But deep down, I wondered, why would someone so famous need so many animals? Why surround yourself with creatures instead of people? Why build a fantasy world and hide inside it? The answers felt heavy, even unspoken. There was something fragile being protected here, something that went far beyond a celebrity's privacy. As the sun began to set over Neverland, casting golden light across the gardens and rides and exotic animals, I realized that everyone here wasn't just working for Michael Jackson. They were protecting what he carried inside. Wounds that hadn't healed, pain that fame couldn't fix, a loneliness that all the success in the world couldn't touch. I had no idea that within days I would see that pain firsthand. That I would witness the moment when the carefully constructed walls came down and the wounded child hiding inside the king of pop would be impossible to ignore. The first encounter happened without warning on my third day at Neverland. I was cleaning the dogs' water bowls near the animal enclosures when I heard the security team's radios crackle to life. Within seconds, 4 guards appeared, moving in formation, creating a protective perimeter around someone I couldn't yet see. Then the guards parted slightly, and Michael Jackson walked through. He moved slowly, almost tentatively, looking around at everything as if searching for something. Peace, maybe, or a moment of quiet in a life that never seemed to offer either. He was dressed simply, black pants, a red shirt, sunglasses pushed up on his head. Without the stage makeup and costumes, he looked younger than I expected, but also more tired. The security team maintained their distance, professional but watchful, clearly trained to protect without smothering. But even they seemed to relax slightly as Michael approached the animal area, as if they knew this was one of the few places where he felt safe. He noticed me from about 20 feet away. I froze, unsure what protocol demanded. Should I look away, keep working, introduce myself? Before I could decide, he raised his hand in a small wave. It was shy, almost childlike, not in a weak way, but in a way that seemed genuinely uncertain about how I'd respond, like he half expected me to reject him or run away. I waved back, and something in his posture relaxed slightly. He walked closer, and I could see his face more clearly now. His eyes were dark, expressive, carrying a weight that seemed too heavy for one person. When he reached me, he spoke softly, his voice barely above a whisper. "Hi, what's your name?" The question was simple, but the way he asked it made it feel important, like he genuinely wanted to know. Wanted to remember, wanted to treat me as a person rather than just another staff member in his employ. "Sarah," I managed, my voice steadier than I felt. "I'm taking care of the dogs." He smiled at that, a real smile that reached his eyes and transformed his entire face. "Thank you for doing that," he said, and then added, "Can I say hello to them?" I nodded and stepped aside. Michael knelt down slowly, extending his hand toward the golden retriever who'd been watching him curiously. The dog approached cautiously at first, then with growing enthusiasm, eventually licking Michael's hand enthusiastically. Michael laughed, a sound so genuine and unguarded that it startled me. This wasn't the polished, performing Michael Jackson. This was someone experiencing a moment of pure, simple joy. He scratched behind the dog's ears with practiced care, speaking to the animal in that same soft voice. "Good boy, such a good boy. You're happy here, aren't you?" The way he spoke to the dog carried an emotion I couldn't quite name. It was tender, but also sad somehow, like he was asking a question that mattered more than it should. After a few minutes, Michael stood slowly, still smiling, but with something else creeping into his expression. That heaviness returning, the weight settling back onto his shoulders. Before leaving, he turned to me and said something I would never forget. "Thank you for taking care of them. They're my family." The way he said family struck me like a physical blow. There was pain in that single word, loneliness, a desperate need for connection that even fame and success couldn't satisfy. These animals weren't just pets. They were the beings he trusted, the ones who didn't judge him, who didn't want anything from him except care and affection. As he walked away, flanked again by his security team, one of the veteran animal caretakers appeared beside me. His name was Marcus, a man in his 60s who'd been at Neverland since the beginning. "You just saw a good day," Marcus said quietly, watching Michael disappear into the distance. "On bad days, he carries the entire world on his shoulders. Everything that's been done to him, everything he's lost, everything people expect him to be, it all crushes him." I didn't fully understand what Marcus meant then. I didn't know about the pressures, the lawsuits, the media scrutiny, the childhood stolen by fame, the constant accusations and invasions of privacy. But I understood enough to feel a deep sadness for the man who'd just knelt in the dirt to pet a dog, who'd spoken about animals as his family, who'd smiled like a child but carried pain like an old man. I had no idea that within days I would witness one of those bad days Marcus had warned me about. And when it came, it would shatter every assumption I'd ever had about who Michael Jackson really was. It was almost sunset when everything began, that golden hour when the light makes everything beautiful, except for nervous animals who sense things humans can't. I had been working at Neverland for almost 2 weeks, settling into a comfortable routine with the dogs. But that evening, something felt off from the moment I arrived at the enclosure area. The air was too still, too quiet, like the calm before a storm. The golden retriever I usually cared for was acting strangely. He was pacing back and forth along the fence line, his ears pinned back, periodically running toward a sound I couldn't identify. I tried calling him, offering treats, using all the calming techniques I'd learned, but he remained agitated, focused on something beyond my perception. That's when I noticed Bubbles. The chimpanzee was in his nearby enclosure, but he wasn't playing or eating or doing any of his usual activities. He was standing completely still, watching everything with an intensity that made my skin prickle. His arms were tense, shoulders raised, fingers curled into tight fists. These were warning signs I should have recognized, should have taken more seriously. Marcus, the senior animal handler, appeared beside me. He'd been watching from a distance, and his expression was grave. "If he gives a second warning call, step back immediately," he said quietly, gesturing toward Bubbles. "Don't hesitate. Just move." I nodded, but before I could even process the instruction, everything exploded into chaos. The dog suddenly barked, not his usual playful bark, but something sharp and aggressive, triggered by whatever invisible threat he'd been tracking. The sound cut through the evening air like an alarm. Bubbles reacted instantly. He let out a high-pitched scream and launched himself forward in his enclosure, his movements explosive and terrifying. The chain-link fence rattled violently as he hit it. The dog, panicked by Bubbles' reaction, ran directly toward me, not attacking but seeking protection. But in that split second of confusion, Bubbles must have interpreted the movement differently, must have thought the dog was threatening me, or that I was threatening something he cared about. What happened next occurred so fast that my memory of it exists in fragmented images rather than a continuous sequence. Bubbles somehow cleared the barrier between his space and the dog area. Whether there was a gate left open or a gap in the fencing, I never found out. He moved with shocking speed, covering the distance between us in seconds. I saw him coming but couldn't process it fast enough to react properly. My body froze, locked in that terrible moment of recognizing danger but being unable to escape it. Bubbles grabbed my forearm with both hands. The strength was unbelievable, far beyond what I'd imagined possible from an animal his size. His fingers dug into my skin like steel cables. Then came the bite. It was fast, painful, hot, a pressure and tearing sensation that sent shockwaves through my entire nervous system. I felt his teeth break through skin, felt the immediate warmth of blood. My body's instinctive response took over. I screamed. That scream echoed across Neverland in a way that seemed to wake the entire property. It was raw, primal, full of pain and fear and disbelief. Everything after that became a blur of motion and noise. Security guards materialized from nowhere, running toward us with radios crackling. Marcus was shouting commands, his voice cutting through my shock. Another handler rushed in with a pole, working to separate Bubbles from me without hurting him. The dog was barking frantically, adding to the chaos. Bubbles had released me but was now agitated and confused, moving erratically, making sounds I'd never heard before, distress calls that were almost human in their emotion. My arm was throbbing, blood running down to my wrist. Someone was wrapping something around it, a shirt maybe, or a towel. Hands were guiding me backward, away from the enclosure, voices talking over each other. And then, cutting through all of it, I heard running footsteps. Heavy, urgent, desperate footsteps. I looked up, dizzy from shock and pain, and saw him. Michael Jackson was running toward us from the main house, his face twisted in an expression I'd never seen on any human being before. Pure, absolute terror mixed with something that looked like grief. The look in his eyes as he reached us stopped everything. It wasn't concern, it wasn't even fear, it was devastation. Michael dropped to his knees on the ground without thinking, without hesitation, like someone who'd just witnessed their child get hurt. The security team tried to hold him back, their hands on his shoulders, voices urgent but respectful. "Michael, let the medical staff handle this." But he shook them off with a force I didn't know he possessed, almost angry at their interference. He reached for my injured arm with such extraordinary care that his hands were trembling more violently than mine. His fingers hovered over the wound, not quite touching, like he was afraid that even looking at it would cause me more pain. "I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry." He repeated the words like a broken mantra, like a prayer he'd said too many times before, like the only words his brain could access in that moment of complete emotional collapse. His eyes were red, not from allergies or tiredness, but from genuine desperation. There were tears forming, threatening to spill, and he was fighting to hold them back with every ounce of control he had left. But the control was slipping. I could see it crumbling in real time. When he saw the blood soaking through the makeshift bandage someone had wrapped around my arm, he brought his hand to his mouth, a gesture so instinctive and childlike that it broke something inside me. He was trying to hold back a sob, trying to keep himself together, but failing. The security guards surrounded us, creating a protective circle, trying once again to pull him away. "Michael, please, let them work. You need to step back." But he refused. His voice came out sharp, almost irritated, which shocked everyone because Michael never spoke to his staff that way. "No, I have to." He couldn't even finish the sentence. The words caught in his throat. Then he said something that made everyone freeze. "I failed. I promised everyone would be safe here. I promised, and I didn't protect anyone." The way he said it, with such absolute conviction, such crushing guilt, made me realize instantly that this wasn't about me at all. This was about something much bigger, much deeper, something that had been living inside him for years, maybe decades. This was about every time someone got hurt because of him, because of his fame, because of the circus that followed him everywhere. This was about every friend who'd been betrayed, every child who'd been used to attack him, every person whose life had been damaged simply by being in his orbit. The on-site medic arrived with a proper first aid kit, kneeling beside me and carefully unwrapping the temporary bandage to assess the wound. As he worked, cleaning the bite with antiseptic that stung sharply, Michael reached out and took my other hand. He held it like I was the only person in the world who could comfort him, like I was somehow the anchor keeping him from completely falling apart. His grip was tight, desperate, his palm sweaty and trembling. I found myself saying words I didn't plan, words that came from some instinct to ease his pain rather than my own. It was an accident, just an accident. Michael looked directly into my eyes, and what I saw there was devastating. It was the look of someone who'd been carrying blame for things that weren't his fault for so long that he no longer knew the difference. "Accidents don't happen to me," he said quietly, his voice breaking. "They happen because of me." That sentence hit me like a physical blow. The weight of it, the belief behind it, the years of accumulated guilt and responsibility and self-blame. It was all there, concentrated in those 7 words. I wanted to argue, to tell him he was wrong, to explain that this was just an unfortunate incident with an animal that got confused. But I couldn't speak. My throat had closed up, and tears were running down my own face now. Marcus, the senior handler, tried to explain to Michael that Bubbles had been protecting me, that the chimpanzee thought the dog was a threat, that it was instinct and confusion, not anyone's fault. But Michael wasn't listening. He was trapped in his own guilt, drowning in it. As the medic finished bandaging my arm properly, Michael finally released my hand. He stood slowly, looking older than he had just minutes before, like the incident had aged him years in moments. The last thing he said before his security team finally convinced him to leave was barely audible, spoken to no one and everyone at once. "Everything I touch." He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't have to. I understood perfectly what he meant. And that understanding would haunt me for years. The next morning, when I arrived at my small workspace in the staff building, I found an envelope on my desk. It was cream-colored, expensive-looking paper, with my initial written in elegant handwriting on the front. Just a single letter, S. I recognized immediately that it hadn't been placed there by any administrative staff. This was personal. My hands shook slightly as I opened it. Inside was a letter, not typed, but handwritten in the same careful script, covering 3 full pages. And tucked between the pages was something that made my breath catch. A white handkerchief folded neatly, with small embroidered initials in the corner, MJ. It was the same handkerchief he'd used the day before to wipe his face when he was crying. I sat down slowly and began to read. The letter was long, intimate, painful in its honesty. Michael wrote about his childhood, about being thrust into fame before he understood what it meant, about learning early that when things went wrong, on stage, on tour, in his family, people looked to him to fix it, even when he was just a child himself. He wrote about carrying responsibility for everyone around him, for their happiness, their safety, their well-being, about how that weight had never lifted, had only grown heavier as the years passed and the stakes got higher. Then came the line that broke me completely. "When something hurts someone, it hurts me too. I don't know how to turn that off. I've never known how." He explained that yesterday's incident had triggered something deep inside him, memories of other times when people had been hurt in his world, when his presence had caused pain, even when he'd tried desperately to prevent it. He apologized again, multiple times throughout the letter, for breaking down the way he had. "I know I scared you," he wrote, "and I'm sorry for that too. You were hurt, and I made it about me. That's not fair to you." But reading those words, I realized he had it backwards. He hadn't made it about himself. He'd simply revealed something true about who he was, someone who felt other people's pain as if it were his own, who carried guilt for things that were never his fault to begin with. The letter ended with a simple line: "Thank you for your kindness. I hope you'll stay." Later that day, Robert, my supervisor, pulled me aside. His expression was serious but not unkind. "The incident yesterday," he said carefully. "We're asking that you don't discuss it with anyone outside the property, not because we're trying to hide anything, but because Michael doesn't need more stories about him falling apart. He deserves privacy in his pain." I nodded immediately. I had no intention of telling anyone. This felt too sacred, too private, too human to turn into gossip or a tabloid story. I continued working at Neverland for another year. During that time, Michael would seek me out periodically, always asking the same question. "How's your arm? Does it still hurt?" The injury had healed within weeks, leaving only a small scar. But every time he asked, even months later, his eyes carried the same guilt, the same concern, as if the wound had never closed for him. As if he was still bleeding from something that had stopped hurting me a long time ago. I began to understand that behind all the fame, behind the king of pop persona, and the record-breaking albums and the sold-out tours, there was a man who carried guilt like other people carry oxygen. It was constant, necessary, impossible to put down. When I finally left Neverland to pursue other opportunities, Michael thanked me personally. We stood in one of the garden pathways, surrounded by flowers and the distant sound of carousel music, and he shook my hand with both of his. "I'm glad you're okay," he said softly, and then, almost as an afterthought, "Really okay." There was relief in his voice, like my well-being had been a weight he'd been carrying for 12 months straight, and only now could he finally set it down. I never gave an interview about my time at Neverland, never sold a story to a tabloid, never spoke publicly about what I witnessed there, until now. I'm sharing this because I think people deserve to know that Michael Jackson wasn't just the icon they saw on stage. He was a person who felt too much, who cared too deeply, who took responsibility for things that were never his to carry. And sometimes I still wonder, why did that accident hurt him so much more than it hurt me? Maybe because for me, it was just a moment of pain that healed. But for him, it was another stone added to a mountain of guilt he'd been carrying his entire life.